Welcome to River Thoughts again. And this time, instead of having four of us, which we did last time, or two of us the time before, we've gone for a middle ground, and James is back with us. You'll have seen him probably twice by now if you've been following the River Thoughts. And Peter's with us, working the controls and probably chipping in. He's got a camera on him, so he'll probably chip in somewhere. But we're going to continue with our discussions, and this time we're going to be a little bit different. I'm going back to a theme from the Gospels this time, because there's a particular verse that has really gripped me that I want these guys to come in on and tell me what they think. And so I'm going to start by reading this out. It's from Luke 12, and it's verses 54 to 56, and it basically says this. This is Jesus saying to the crowd, "When you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say, 'It's going to rain,' and it does. And when the south wind blows, you say, 'It's going to be hot,' and it is. Hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret this present time?" So the topic is, why is it that people don't know how to interpret the present time? And what is that all about in the context of the whole chapter? So that's what I want to unpack today a little bit. I mean, in one sense, the weather patterns at the moment this summer it's been so hot at times, and last winter it rained all the time, and yet maybe it isn't quite so easy to interpret the weather these days. The guys here might want to chip in on this, but I don't know if everybody even notices whether a wind direction affects what's going to happen to our weather. Although actually, as we sit here and do this, the weather forecast today was saying the north of Britain at the moment's got kind of westerlies coming in and drizzle and rain and 15 degrees in the Western Highlands, and in the south, and particularly the southeast, we've got more of a southern bent with a possible eastern one coming that's going to really heat it up, and it's going to be 30 there compared to 15 in Scotland. So maybe somebody somewhere is chipping along at this with us. So I wonder what you two thought, James and Peter, about what I've said so far.
Well, I actually had an example of this morning while I was live on radio. A friend of mine lives in America, and they were saying that the temperature dropped something like 40 degrees in 48 hours. Now that's 40 American degrees, so it's not that extreme, but it's still pretty extreme. Yeah, Fahrenheit. Yeah. And I said, "Oh, are you going to have a storm?" And she was like, "Yeah, it's absolutely tipping it down and the wind's blowing." Because, if the temperature drops that much, a storm's coming. So, yeah.
I mean, I get that a little bit with occasionally I get a migraine. And one of the triggers is that if there's a sudden drop in pressure or a sudden increase in pressure, I can get a migraine. Yeah. It's either that or dehydration, but, and maybe there is something in that, James.
However, I think we're doing the thing, aren't we? We're doing the thing that Jesus was saying not to do. We're interpreting the weather instead of talking about
what's going on in this world. Exactly. So what do you think about that, either of you, about interpreting the times and what we're like at doing it? I mean, you've been chipping in before. We filmed about the world out there you'd rather not see much of sometimes.
No.
Peter.
Yeah, what do you think Jesus meant by interpreting the world and the times we live in? What does that mean? Because it's a bit vague.
I think one of the things I always think about with that verse is that in my mind it connects to a lot of people live in the past. So they spend a lot of time looking at what has happened, but not looking at the relevance of what is happening.
So is it like having presence?
In some ways, yeah.
Okay.
It's being present in the present time. Because I think one of the things that Jesus was up against in terms of the religious authorities at the time was a whole load of people that were living out of very structured and strict rule systems from the past and not living their lives in the moment where they were.
So how does that relate, or do you think it relates to now, for people out there now?
I mean, it's extremely complicated what we've got now, I think, in terms of, if you look at the country we're in, right?
Yeah.
We're in England.
Cornwall.
And the country we're in, Cornwall. we're still building Victorian houses, right? we're still building with the same bricks.
For those who might not understand that, what do you
Yeah.
mean we're still building Victoria? I mean, I know we're going off a bit, but
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
You mean the architecture and how
The
it's built?
architecture, how it's built, it's still Victorian buildings that are built to, you know, be permanent and be fixed in place.
Okay.
Right? And there's still, we were talking about this before, where the buildings are built to keep the heat in, right? And right now we're about to trip over into a heat wave.
Yeah. What, another one?
Yeah, another
Oh,
one.
we just had one. Okay.
Yeah. And I think because we aren't moving on in our thinking from being a horrible cold country where the Thames freezes over,
Yeah.
like in the Victorian period, and actually now we live in a country that's getting hotter and hotter every year, we've not actually started building for the moment.
We need air conditioning.
We need air conditioning.
Well,
we need
do we?
good windows. We need, you know.
That's almost a separate topic,
Yeah.
but there is. I mean, I think that's a debatable topic. As is, are we going to get hotter forever?
Yeah.
Because the UK could actually become very hot in summer and extremely cold in winter under some of the predictions of what will happen. But that's another topic if we get back to climate again and crises of that nature. But let's keep to whether people look at the present time properly and what might stop them from looking at what's in front of them.
Well,
I would say what's stopping people looking at what's in front of them is by looking at what's in front of them. Because people are just being absorbed by like scrolling the social media. They're looking at the world, but they're not getting a view of the whole world,
The bigger picture sort
the
of thing.
bigger picture, and they're not going deep into things. They're just being
Superficial?
they're just focusing on nothing really.
Because it's interesting in the Luke passage that the things that come up before this verse, which what Jesus talks about there, is people being aware of what things almost distract them from seeing the bigger picture that you're talking about. You mentioned there, I think a valid one, you know, kind of social media, scrolling through things, being distracted by their own almost algorithm situation or whatever. But he also talks, and I think some of them are still relevant, about the idea of sometimes people are almost absorbed with their own context, their selfish context, because they're fearful of what other people will think of them. So they're things that drive them in life might be because of their fear of what might happen if they don't do it a particular way, almost like a sheep be copying one another, which could be true of social media. He also mentions and challenges the idea of people always wanting more, of being greedy and coveting things, and how that distracts them because they're so focused on things that they can get hold of or whatever, possessions and so on, that it distracts them from seeing the bigger picture. And then he talks about being careless about what you do and not really being serious about things, which you've partly mentioned there by saying they're so focused on this, they're not doing serious stuff.
Yeah.
And he also says we worry too much about things.
Yeah.
And all of those things get in the way of seeing what it is that's in front of us that's important.
I think we need to be careful.
Go on.
Often people read the Bible and they take what Jesus said to a collective of people and they individualize it to people that exist now.
So what does that mean for us or people listening now?
So what I mean is, like, we can look at it as if, oh, people shouldn't be scrolling on their phone, it's bad for them, right? Or we can say the companies that are making these things need to behave better towards the people who are sitting on their phone scrolling.
I would say you need a sense of ownership of what you have control over, because of course the social media people should be held accountable to all the bad stuff they're doing, but it's also us being accountable to what we do with our attention. So we can't blame it all on one person.
It's a bit of a both.
Exactly.
End, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Like an example of that is a law recently that under 16s can't be on social media, that's a law, but it doesn't necessarily translate to the children following the law or what the parents decide to do and giving them a phone.
Mm-hmm.
There's like ownership of responsibility at different levels.
Yep.
And it's not useful to blame it on the world. You sort of have to be accountable. But what you were saying makes sense as well.
I think there's a balance between the two,
Yeah.
like you were saying.
But the one aspect I've not mentioned, because I think people are distracted, and that's what Luke 12 is all about. And people, you actually said a minute ago, James, an interesting point, said often people read the Bible. Actually, not many people do read the Bible. And I know what you meant, but actually it isn't a book that's read very much these days. But my point about it is that it's so relevant that although Jesus was speaking 2,000 years ago to a particular set of people, whether it's individual or corporate, the points they still matter. And the one I haven't mentioned yet is that right at the end, which this verse is part of, is almost saying people are spiritually dull, that they haven't got the picture of something that is a hope for the future, which gives them a handle to live now better because their awareness is different. I mean, Jesus says at one point in this passage, be watchful about what's around you. There's a mess around you. You're not supposed to ignore it or be dull or just lead a boring life. You are supposed to take note and that have an impact on you, including that, of course, Jesus' ultimate message was, I will die. He told his disciples he'd die. He told them how he'd die, but he did tell them he'd come back to life again. And if we haven't got that perspective, then actually we're missing something about the present time and how we should see it, because it's not the be-all and end-all. It doesn't mean we shouldn't live really well now, but at the same time we should know why we should try to live well now.
I think that there's a whole multi-layer of obstacles to get over when it comes to connecting with the idea that Jesus is both speaking to us now and also speaking at a time in the past.
Go on.
I mean, I could list them. So one of them is the history of how the church has talked about what Jesus has said, as if what Jesus has said is done and is
past
fixed,
tense, in other words.
And is in the past tense.
Yeah.
So how do we then go, actually, God's got more to say today?
So do you think people often think, well, that was for them, but it's irrelevant, it doesn't matter now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the church has basically communicated that, even if it hasn't used those words.
And even if it hasn't meant to, maybe.
And even if it hasn't meant to, that is what has been communicated out into the world.
I've got a little bit of a thought.
Yeah.
The Bible. I think the Bible is like an iceberg, and 10% of it is the written word above water that you can see, and then the 90% below the water is how to live by the Bible. So the point I was saying that...
But how you do that is partly, that application is so varied depending on who's reading it. Each different individual will read it differently. So the iceberg bit you're talking about is almost, I mean, we have to interpret it only in our humanness.
Well, it's just...
So we're not going to get it right all of the time.
It's just the faith part of the Bible, because if you read the Bible and you only read the Bible, then you're not following the teachings of the Bible. You've got to read the Bible and live your life and make sure the two connect.
Exactly. You do. And some people read it and then ignore what they've read.
Yeah.
And I would say that's actually more common than actually applying it very well.
Yeah.
And we've had some discussions, Peter, haven't we? For example, it says love your enemies, but actually, how do we apply that?
Yeah.
We did a short talk on that, but actually, that's just an example of loads of different situations where we have to work out how to apply them.
And if we are to model Jesus' life, he didn't spend his time writing the Bible, did he? He lived his life, which inspired everyone else.
Yeah. He was a living word.
So to be a Christian and follow Jesus like he lived, we have to live our lives more than just the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
We do, but only if you live it without that connection, then you could go off in all sorts of directions that wasn't helpful or fruitful.
You need the Bible.
I think you do, but that's obviously my faith perspective, and so there would be people out there who wouldn't necessarily agree with that, or might take a different set of holy words or whatever, or might say, well, I'd rather live my life in my humanness. And I would contest that, but I'd be happy to listen to that.
Yeah, the other thought is, as a Christian, do you follow teachers' teachings, or do you follow Jesus? And it's more than just the written word. I'm not sure how this relates to the original scripture.
Well, no, I think it does.
It does.
I think
Go
it
on, why do you
definitely
think it does?
Well, for several reasons. But the main one is that Jesus in the passage isn't trying to tell us how to live one time.
No, it's not.
He's showing us a mirror to how people are living at that time, right? So he's describing how people were living at that time, right? And we look at that and we can go, actually, a lot of people are living like that now too.
Yeah, that
right.
Is,
it
might look different in one sense, but it's not different,
including me at times, right? But what we miss in all of that is that we can take the one-off instance of this conversation in the context of everything else Jesus did and said, and we can go, okay, so this is what Jesus was pointing out wasn't great, and we can view that as a fixed point in time, as a thing. But Jesus showed us then how to live in the present, how to actually interpret the present time in his life. He went about doing that,
So what would that mean for us? I mean, if the average punter who might listen to this, James, in your view, what does that mean for them? If he's saying there, well, we're not even spotting how to interpret the times, what's the adjustment that he is pushing us to think about from the way you see it then? So what do we do as individuals? We can banter down the pub on a Wednesday night with a load of guys, and we can have we can have interesting discussions about what's going on in the world, which we do. Yeah. Of course, that's always the caveat to that is we might not be getting truthful information some of the time, or the way we interpret it might not be the best. But we've got to somehow get an idea of what's going on in our lives locally and nationally and internationally if we're going to have any perspective. But he's saying here, you don't even know how to interpret what's going on in these times. So what do you think that means for us? I mean, if somebody wants to respond to this 20-minute dialogue we've got here, what do I do?
Well, let's look at the examples. So let's look at, say, the passage that's wrongly titled "The Woman Caught in Adultery." For example, it shouldn't be titled that. I'll stand by that every single day and say it shouldn't be titled that, but it is, unfortunately. Jesus interpreted the times, interpreted the misogyny, the hate towards women at the time, and found a way to subvert it and say, no, actually, all of you lot have been messing up as well.
So he was seeing it differently.
He was seeing
the time differently.
But he was perceiving what the time was correctly, that there was discrimination against this woman, that there was...
So if you, James, were doing that and seeing it wrong, how do you move from a position of seeing it wrong to seeing it better in your life, say? I'm not sure that's an easy question.
That's a very difficult question. One of the things that I am trying to do every single day is I actually want to become a better person, right? I want to do better than I have done in the past on all sorts of topics. Like we can look at misogyny for one,
But what are you going to, so would you have to take, you're just saying that's your starting point for a load of responses you might make to given situations.
Yes, I am trying to learn and get better. One of the ways I do that is to look at how Jesus behaved in situations. It's one of the ways that I try and get better. You know, I see how he approached people, I see how he spoke to people, and I try within myself to move closer and closer to his attitudes. I also look at other people who've been inspiring through history, and this is something that often happens in I think our lives is like, and in the lives of Christians particularly, is history finishes at the Bible and then starts again last week, rather than the whole chunk in between, and all the examples of people trying to live better lives all through history.
It's interesting what you're saying. I mean, I don't know what Peter thinks of this, because I mean, I can see all of us. I mean, you know, we know one another quite well now, but you can see changes in people depending on how they're learning or not learning from situations all the time, and but I mean, Jesus was speaking into I mean, there's two aspects to this. You said, "Well, I try to be a better person," but you're trying to be a better person because it is good to be outwardly thinking of others rather than ourselves, which is what Jesus addresses by saying, for example, don't be covetous, don't be greedy, don't be wanting more. He says, don't be hypocritical. Well, we've actually had a discussion, Peter and I, about hypocrisy in the past, and we've talked about it down the pub. The sort of aspects of things that we personally have to think about in our own lives, but they come from a faith perspective. So Jesus doesn't say you've got to be better in order to have faith in him. He says, I've done the business of giving you that, if only you believe in me. And then there's a response to that of being better. Yep. He's saying to these people, well, you think you know me, but actually there's all this happening. You need to see it differently. You need to interpret the times differently. And I think there are a lot of people who are interested in spiritual things, and they just need help to see that there's a step to take to get to the point where they can interpret them better. It's a both and that, you know, Jesus is basically saying, well, I'm the way, the truth, and the life would be the gospel thing. If you do that, then you'll start to see these things differently. And I think it's a crucial chapter in Luke's gospel about the teaching of Jesus. It's not only the person, but what the person wants you to therefore respond with. And I don't think we're watchful enough. I don't think I'm watchful enough about this world. You said to me, Peter, well, I know I think this, and we might have different opinions, but we've got to form them somehow. But at least being watchful and inquisitive, and in a world that is in lots of ways more complicated now because we get so much news media and feed and social media and everything else coming at us. How do we interpret it? Well, I have to always go back to this book, the Bible, to help me to see the times.
Yeah, because you need to have a source of truth, and the Bible does that. But the thing about...
Well, no, the Bible doesn't. Well,
if there is a source of truth,
yeah,
and the density of good stuff in the Bible is good, so if you read it and base your life around that, you're getting somewhere. But if you find yourself in an echo chamber looking at a niche, 1% of the public, which doesn't necessarily be grounded in some sort of goodness,
absolutely,
you can get lost in that.
Yes, you can.
So
that's why social media algorithms don't help, isn't it?
Yeah, because they don't optimize for the betterment of the people using them.
Yeah. Whereas
you could say the Bible does.
So
up to a point, but I think I'd go back to the truth thing and say actually it's not what the Bible is, the living word,
right,
to be useful to us, as it would say in one part of its own words.
Yeah.
But the point is that Jesus was the truth, not the.
Yeah.
You know, I can't start saying if somebody goes to the Bible and says, well, they're all killing one another in their hundreds of thousands in the Old Testament, therefore, you know, you can't just take it like that. You have to be careful.
Well, it's like simultaneously you've got the Bible is, particularly the Gospels, are a filter through which you can filter all the information you have coming to you and begin to interpret the world around you. and that can be very, very useful and helpful. There's a couple of things that I would like to push back on in future discussions.
Go on. We've got to stop in a minute, anyway.
One of them being the Bible doesn't say that the Bible isn't talking about the whole Bible when it says that all Scripture is useful.
That particular verse
Yeah.
has to be modified by looking at another one, which does. You can imply that it's the whole Bible.
Also, useful and useful does not mean the same as immediately 100% relevant right now in every single verse.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. We could come back to that.
Yeah,
we
that's
could
a
come back to
discussion
that.
for another
There's
time.
almost a one-line verse that we could look at.
Yeah. Also, the way, the truth, and the life is one of my favourite verses, and we should talk about that at some point.
Maybe we should.
I just have one.
Go on,
thought.
Peter, and then I've got one summary statement to make.
I think the Bible is just a book, but when you live and follow the Bible, it becomes its own living thing.
I would totally agree with that as well. I mean, that's actually what the first verses of John's Gospel say. It isn't the words of the Bible, but what it basically, Jesus is the living word, and the whole Bible is focused on the character Jesus. It actually doesn't look it sometimes unless you know your stuff, but we can help with that. But I think the other thing I want to throw in is the comment that was usually made, it's probably 100 years ago now, and I can't remember which person it was who said it, said that they always try, if they're trying to say something that they think is significant spiritually, to a congregation of people who are grappling as to what they believed, etc., they would say, I need the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. Now, obviously, newspapers have changed their format now, but I think there is something about the sense of that, even in the verse we've read today, that you need to know how to apply a particular worldview. The biblical worldview. But you need to know what's going on in that world of now in order to gel those two things together. And there's something in that is of significance. And there's a danger if somebody is, in a church or teaching in a church and all they focus on is one thing and they don't know what's going on in the world, they could speak into the world badly.
Because what it means to follow God and being a Christian is different now than it was 100 years ago. In 100 years' time, being a Christian will be different then, because you've got to link God and how you live to the world around you.
You have. I mean, the basics of what you should believe within that faith, the Christians would say,
right.
There are certain things that are fundamental that don't change. How you interpret that for a given age is different.
Yeah.
So, for example, I don't think anybody 500 years ago who was a Christian would say Jesus didn't die and then rose again, and that would still be true today. I mean, I can mention other things as well in a kind of creedal statement, but though that wouldn't change. But how you then applied that to a world of the Middle Ages or a world now might be somewhat different.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I've noticed within sort of my Christian circles is I speak to a lot of Christians whose response to the current times is to try and get back to a mythical time in the past, right?
Mm-hmm.
That everything was real good in this mythical time in the past. Usually they gloss over a whole load of things that were happening at that time that were horrific, things like slavery, things like wars and really horrible stuff that was happening. This mythical past they're trying to get back to when we were closer to how Jesus wants it all, right? Rather than going, okay, there's some things going on that aren't right. How can I move this towards a right thing, a thing that is healthy, a thing that is positive for humans? How can I move this thing forward to a better future rather than backwards to a past that never existed?
Because we don't ultimately know the exact details of that anyway.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap it up, I think. I'm not conscious that I haven't got a clock in front of me, but I think we must have been our usual 20 minutes or more. Just to say, my suggestion would be, if you've been watching this, why not read Luke 12 if you can find a copy of the Bible from somewhere? If you haven't got one on your shelf, borrow one, look it up on the internet, whatever you need to do. It's a really interesting read to look at Luke 12 and read it and see what does that mean for the present day and how I should live. So we'll stop there for today. Thank you, James. Thank you, Peter. See you next time. Cheers.